Let me introduce you to a colleague of mine from Belgium, Ilvo, Tommy Doze. He will elaborate for 10 minutes on what use we can make from long-term field experiments. Tommy, please.
Yes, hello, everyone. So I'm here today to present the results who were gathered within Work Package 7, so on a database on European long-term field experiments. In the first, as a short introduction, I don't think I have to persuade someone about the usefulness of LTEs. I think they're indispensable sources of knowledge. They can be used to assessing the long-term sustainability of much of the agricultural management practices. They can serve as long-term data sets for mathematical models, and they will also, I think, become important in the MRV systems for recent initiatives on carbon farming. So protecting existing long-term field experiments and establishing new ones to addressing current or future research issues is very important. And I think this was kept in mind when writing the proposal for the EGP Soil project. And so it was assigned as one task within Work Package 7 to make a network of experimental field trials. We not only collecting it, but also making it easy, accessible via an online accessible database. And in that database, people should find the LTEs and the metadata. So to keep it straight, it was only the metadata that was gathered, not the experimental data. To do so, we come up with an action plan. In the first step, we set some criteria for the LTEs. The next step, we identified the LTEs and the owners. We developed a template to gather the data. The database was constructed, explored, and we also produced an online accessible database. Which criteria did we use for the LTEs? In the first step, of course, they had to be related to soil management. They had to be running for at least 5 years. Now, when people speak of LTEs, they often use the definition of 20 years, but we wanted to include younger ones also because we want to encourage people who are responsible for younger LTEs to be included in this database as well. And we wanted to also detect recent trends in field research. So that's why we lowered the limit to 5 years. We wanted to make sure that management history is recorded, which is important if you want to use it for modeling, for instance. We wanted to have a soil sampling at the start or a control treatment. And also the crop and or soil parameters had to be monitored on a regular basis. Now, a lot of people were involved in task 7.3, so all the national contacts were included. And with those parameters, we asked them within their country to identify LTEs that are existing, that are running for the moment, to be included in our database. And we came up with a list of 453 LTEs from 20 EU countries. In the next step, of course, to gather the data, we developed a template, and we didn't start from scratch. We based ourselves on existing initiatives, similar initiatives, and we used as much as possible the keywords tree of the knowledge library of Bonares, which contains controlled vocabulary. We worked with drop-down menus as much as possible to standardize it. The template include a lot of instructions. There were clear definitions of the terms that were being used. And we also made a distinction between important data and useful data to encourage the LTE owners to complete the template without taking too much time. So this is a template. You can download it from Zenodo. So we have put it on Zenodo so everybody can use it for other initiatives if they want to. And the template is really constructed as a relational database. So we use unique IDs and we gather data of tillage, of the treatments, of course, the tillage, soil amendments, and so on, all the management practices that are going on that field experiment. All those templates were sent to the LTE owners, and then we received the responses. We did an automatic check on those templates to make sure that all the data was there. And we came up with a database of 200, up till today, 226 LTEs from 22 countries. And then we also included climatic information based on the X and Y coordinates, which made it possible to have an analysis. So after we constructed the database, we did the first exploration. Here you can see the year that the LTE has started. So we see that in our database, most of the LTEs started from the 80s till year 2000 and 2010. We also had a look at which soil groups, soil texture types were mainly involved. We see that the land use, most of the LTEs were organized on arable land. Most of the LTEs were found in continental climatic zone, mostly on conventional farming. So this was first general overview of what was in the database. Besides, each LTE also has a different research team. So we identified the research teams within each LTE. And then we see that in the beginning, so in the older LTEs, we're mainly looking at the usual suspects, such as amendments and tillage systems, while the younger LTEs also include other treatments like cover crops, crop rotation, residue incorporation, and so on. So that's a clear evolution that we can see in the LTE. The same with the number of research teams. So the older LTEs focus on one or maximum two research teams, so or amendments or tillage or both, but we see that the younger LTEs try to include more interaction effects of different management practices. Besides, we also created some dashboards to have a clear overview of the database, and this is also in the paper that is recently submitted by a colleague of mine. So this is for the tillage system. We just give a brief overview of what is in the database. And there you can see, for instance, that most of the LTEs on tillage compare non-inversion tillage with inversion tillage. So that's one of the findings that you can find over there. The same just to show about amendments. So most of them compare organic amendments with no fertilizer or inorganic fertilizers. And we also had a look on which climatic zones can we find those LTEs, which texture types are missing, for instance, and so on. So if we have some first conclusions about the database, we can see that most of them are on arable land in the continental zone. Most of them have monocropping, which means that one crop is grown every year, and especially focusing on amendments, tillage, crop rotations, and residue management. Also there, but a little less extent, Atlantic zone, boreal zone, intercropping, cover crops, and treatment like comparing different cropping and farming systems. And what is really lacking in our database or in LTEs across Europe is the pastures, so experiments on grasslands. The Mediterranean region is not really well presented in our database. Agroforestry, but this is of course rather perhaps a newer technique. And we also have little or no experiments which focus on compaction, irrigation or drainage, and also who combine really multiple management practices within one field trial. Of course, that's not the final findings of our database. I told you that we had to produce something online accessible, and therefore we made a cooperation with the people from Bonares who already had a similar initiative for Germany, and were also interesting to elaborate it to Europe. And they made this really nice online accessible tool where you can find your LTE quite easily. And so we made an agreement that all the data from EGP Soil were entered in this online accessible database. So all the LTE data is now online in this Bonares tool. And you have different search function where you can have a look at the research team, land use, to find the LTEs of interest. Now, you can all access it and you can all have a look at it. If you see now, for instance, that, oh, my LTE is not present in the database and I would really love to have it in there. If you already had an email with the template, but the template was completed and you still do not find it in the database, please send a mail perhaps some of the data was missing in the template and we can still solve it. If the template was not completed or you were not aware of this initiative of Work Package 7, you can still do it. You can download and complete the template. I have told you that it is easily online available, and you can still send the template to us, and then we can make sure during the running time of EGP Soil that all the data is still transferred to Bonares. Okay, I really have to thank a lot of people who contributed to this database. All the contributors to task 7.3, of course, the people from Bonares. Here you can find all the links to the templates, to the database, because we also published the database on Zenodo and also on the papers that are related to the database. Okay.
Thank you very much. Tommy, stay here. And I must say that all the presentations of these EGP Soil Annual Science Days will become available to you, and also the recordings will be put on the website. Tommy, I'm looking at the room. Are there any questions for Tommy? We have 5 minutes. Penny?
Yeah, thanks a lot for a very nice and clear presentation. I think it's quite impressive work. I have a two-sided question. So at some point you reported that there were about 400 plus LTEs that you discovered in Europe, and then about 200 plus were actually in the database. So I was wondering, did you get any feedback? What are reasons not to share the metadata to this template? And on the other hand, for the ones that did share, do they already perceive added value of sharing their metadata to your system?
Yeah, for the first question, so we identified the LTEs and the contact persons, and then we send out mails, and we also included in each country an information session to the LTE owners, but then still some of them did not respond, and I don't know why. So the templates were sent to them, but they did not respond. We had several reminders, but still, yeah, they did not include their data. On the second one, that's a really good question, and maybe that's something we could still do within the running time of EGP, and to have a little questionnaire to all the LTE owners if they have, yeah, if they have some added value from being included in that database.
The long-term food experiments, normally they were designed to answer questions that maybe is not relevant now. So how we deal with our long-term food experiments, that they don't become a museum?
Tommy?
You mean that some of the treatments are not yet relevant anymore? So yeah, we wanted to gather all the LTEs which are still running, and perhaps with new techniques or
design. And then
no, not the design, but for instance, some of the parameters have not been measured. I think of like greenhouse gas emissions have not been measured, for instance, on some of the LTEs with perhaps interesting treatments.
In order to stay relevant, they could add extra indicators or something. No? Is that an answer?
Yeah, I think this LTE database can create an opportunity for other researchers to find them. And
we have a long-term field experiments in Norway, and that sometimes these treatments or the systems is not more relevant, so it's quite hard to get funding to keep going it.
Yep.
And then we start new long-term field experiments, and then and we always question ourselves, okay, we have a museum or are we having a relevant field experiment?
Yeah, maybe you think it's not relevant anymore, but perhaps other researchers. Yeah, I know that funding can also be a problem. I also am an LTE owner, but I think this LTE database can help to make some cooperations with other institutes or researchers. So.
Hello, I'm Tula Larmala from Luke. So I was wondering, in terms of soil type, what kind of distribution did you find? Was it representative? And of course, I'm especially interested how many experiments on peat soil did you were able to locate?
Yeah, it was shown in one of my slides, and also it's included in our analysis. So it's now being published, so you can find all that information in that paper. But most of it were Cambi soils, for instance, and Luvi soils, but not much peat soils were included.
More comment to what you said. I think that's really interesting. Katharina Harming, I'm from Germany, and I'm also involved in the Buna race. This was a big discussion about the museum, and we also discussed that maybe some of the LTEs, although they were designed to be ceteris paribus, have to change also with climate change. But that's an extremely interesting discussion. And we also figured out that the long-term field experiments, even if they are not relevant anymore at this particular place, to analyze them in combination with other LTE gives so much additional information and interest that it is extremely useful, particularly for the modeling colleagues, to do so. And we also experienced, after 7 years of working, trying to get data on LTE, that there is a change in perception also from the funders, obviously, and maybe we positive, yes, so that we together maybe we really match that we can maintain the LTE financing.
That was not a question, but a remark.
Yeah, a nice one. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you very much, Tommy.